Dear World Christian, thank you so very much for stopping by on today. We have a quick one. I wanted to discuss again this notion of reparations, where we in the 22nd century are due some kind of payment, some kind of compensation for something that was done in the 19th century to possibly to our ancestors. That's not a biblical concept. I'm sorry. There's no way you can make that make sense. We're going to go ahead and talk about it because people keep saying it. But before we get in too far, I want to just make sure that we explain and go over what is the gospel. The gospel is the good news that we as sinners don't have to pay for our sin anymore. We don't have to pay for the sins even of our fathers or our ancestors, because in Christ, Christ has done away with all of our sin debt. And only through Christ can we know and be assured that our sin debt has been paid. Otherwise, when we close our eyes and without Christ, we know that we are going to have to pay that debt. That debt is going to come due, and we don't have a way to pay for it. It is only through Christ that we know that our sin debt has been taken care of. So today, let's go ahead and jump into this. You may have seen this. Shout out to Woke Preacher Clips. So let's go with this. It's Justin Giboney again, doing what he does.
The Protestant church in the U.S. is just a whole bunch of brand new institutions, right? You've got all kinds of non-denominational churches that have sprung up in storefronts, for example. They have a history, but it might be to 2011, that particular church. What do you say to a lot of these much newer Christian institutions? There's all kinds of them in evangelical spaces that have exploded and grown up since the end of slavery, since the end of Jim Crow. And they're going to look at you and say, Justin, what are you talking about?
And they should look at you like that, because what you're saying is not biblical. They should look at you like that because, again, he's laying out the framework that there's churches that have started in the last 10 years, 15 years, and they had nothing to do with racism or any of that kind of stuff. And Giboney is going to make this claim that they still have to. And I want you to see just how sneakily he tries to weasel around this. So let's go.
I have had nothing to do with it. This institutional analysis doesn't make any sense to me because we're not a seminary that benefited from slavery. We're a church that started with 23 people in an old, an old 7-Eleven building 15 years ago. What do you?
I would say that you're part of a culture and institutions.
Okay, because he kind of spoke over him. He said Giboney is going to say that you're a part of a culture and institution that has benefited from, in general. Listen to what he says. Let me back up just a little bit. David French and him kind of clash words right here. And I think this really was kind of the good setup. So let's just back up, even though they're going to speak over each other again.
And institutions that have benefited in general, right? So it's, even
so in general, notice how the ambiguous words that Giboney is going to use in general, like, well, what do you mean in general? I've benefited in a culture. What does that mean? What does that mean? Because Giboney has benefited from a culture as well. And he's not going to be as flippant as giving away his part that he's benefited from a culture. He's not going to be so flippant about that.
Whenever we look at sin or when we look at Christian ethics,
whoa.
You got to.
He said sin. So there's a sin that's involved here. What is the sin, Mr. Giboney? What is the sin? I'm going to back it up just so you can see that he said that. He said, whenever we look at sin, we look at, and when we look at, and he's going to say Christian ethics. So he's saying a sin. So what is the sin that is being exacted? What is it? What is the sin, sir? What is it? Never going to say.
Christian ethics. You got to look at the spirit of it.
Okay.
Because we want to get.
So a moment ago, we got to look at the culture. The culture is what we benefited from. Now we know the spirit behind how and why Mr. French is drinking out of that blue coffee cup right there. We know the spirit behind that. And we got to look at the spirit behind it. How do you know this? How do you know the spirit behind why Mr. French is drinking that? How do you know that? How do you know?
Get out of something. If we want to be overly technical and be lawyers like you and I are, we can do that.
So by saying we can be overly technical and we can be all lawyery, that's a shutdown method because nobody wants to be all technical. When you think about lawyers, you think about reading tons of stuff and big words that you don't understand and so on and so forth. Nobody wants to do that. So there's like, oh, I'll give it to you. No problem. So no, go ahead. Let's not be technical about it. But I want to propose a question. What is it that he's actually saying? He's going to use a lot of general words. And like, well, what is the actual sin that he is trying to derail or the sin that he's trying to make right? What is it?
I wouldn't do that with God, though. And I think if you really look at the spirit of, honestly, if you really look at the spirit of what that ethic is saying.
What is the spirit of the ethic? What is the violation? What is it? What is the ethic that you're referring to, Mr. Giboney? What is it? And what is the violation of that ethic?
Have I in direct or indirect ways had a benefit? And even if I
have I in a direct or indirect way had a benefit? Is there anything that resembles that in the scriptures? Anything that resembles that? But watch this. Remember in the beginning, he said a culture. Mr. Giboney is a part of a culture, whether he wants to admit it or not. And if he wants to say that David French has benefited from the culture, he has to be also equal weights and measures and say that he himself has benefited in our culture, in our society that we currently live in.
Has something been taken from somebody?
Has something been taken from somebody? What is the something and who is the somebody, sir? Notice he doesn't give that. He's not going to give that because it's super general. Well, yes, something has been taken from somebody, of course. But what is it? What is it in this regard? Because remember, it's a sin. He said it is a sin, and he's dealing with it from a biblical ethic, allegedly.
What is my responsibility? So, yeah, we can get technical. We can say, well, if you look at this, we didn't exactly, we weren't.
He wants to shut it down. So, hey, you don't want to get all in these tall weeds, do you? You don't want to get all lawyery, do you? Do you? All right, let's let that slide.
The ones we shut this organization down and started something new. Yeah, but the benefits of that old institution still flow in one way or another to the new institution.
What is that? The benefits of an old institution still flow into the other institution. What are you talking about? What are you referring to, sir? What? Again, somebody must push back and ask us questions. What are you referring to, Mr. Giboney?
Right, even if it isn't a line item in the budget, right? There's still ways that flow from one to the other. So
how is it a sin? Remember, he said it was a sin. So what is the sin that is being passed down through shut down institution to the new institution? What is the sin?
You got to look at the spirit of it, and Christians know that in other spaces. We know that in other situations, but we want to get very technical and just find ways to get out of it. No,
Mr. Giboney, you're welcome to not get out of it. You're welcome to do whatever you choose and welcome to do. Your church can give money to whomever they choose to. You just cannot exact it on other people. That's just it. There's another way around that, sir. I don't understand why that's complex for you to grasp and understand.
You can convince yourself of that. I would be worried that you could convince God of that. And so we need to look at it a little bit differently.
I think it's very interesting. He tried to invoke God in the beginning and the end of this thing, but in the middle, everything he said was just not biblical. You can say that you're invoking God or using biblical ethics till the cows come home. It doesn't matter. You made a sandwich, you got your bread ends, your bread on both ends. But sir, what you put in the middle is complete and utter garbage. That's not a biblical ethic. We're not beholden to this at all. You can try to show me, but I would love to see it, but it's not. The scriptures don't teach this. And therein is the problem. And I think it's extremely interesting how much this sounds just like Jamar Tisby when he was preaching about reparations and that white churches should write checks to black churches. You've seen that one, right? Okay. Well, the video is right here. So please check it out. And I appreciate you. As a matter of fact, I'll just meet you over there. See you over there.